How the United States slowly became a country. Boring history for sleep. The story of the United States was not fast or exciting. It was slow, long, and quiet, filled with fields and rivers and people who worked and waited and lived in ways that seemed to change but never really did. It began with land and wind and trees that stood for centuries before men came. The people who first walked across the land came slowly, step by step, following animals and seasons. They built fires and shelters and moved with the earth, not against it. They did not call it America. They did not call it anything. They just lived there, generation after generation. The land changed slowly. The rivers moved a little. The forests grew and burned and grew again. Time passed like a long wind. Later, other people came across the water. They brought ships and tools and hopes and fears, and they saw the land as new, though it was old. They built towns of wood and stone. They worked the fields and wrote letters back across the ocean, saying it was wide and empty, though it was not empty. They made rules and prayers and tried to make this land like the one they left, but it never was the same. The days were long, the winters cold, the summers full of insects and heat and waiting and planting and waiting again. Slowly more people came. Slowly more land was taken. Slowly the old world faded and the new one began. But it was never sudden. It was always slow and heavy and full of work. The colonies grew like trees, roots deep, branches tangled, each one a little different, but bound together by need. They traded fish and grain and wood and talk. They argued about rules and taxes and distance. The king was far away, but his shadow was long. The people grumbled in taverns by dim light. Their words were soft at first, then louder. The talk turned to action, but even that was not quick. Men walked miles to meet in rooms that smelled of ink and sweat. They wrote long papers with slow, careful hands. The war that came was not glorious. It was hunger, cold, mud, smoke, and long waits between noise. The fields lay quiet while armies marched past. The farmers watched the sky and the smoke and wondered what it meant. When the fighting stopped, the quiet returned, but it was not peace. It was confusion. Talk again, long talk, endless talk about rules and words and who should decide what. The air was heavy with it. The men sat in rooms for days and weeks and months until words became a kind of dust that filled everything and settled slowly into laws and papers. The country was born, but it did not feel like birth. It felt like exhaustion. The people went back to fields and shops and small lives. The flags changed, the coins changed, but the days did not. The sun rose, the rain fell, the crops grew and failed and grew again. Slowly roads spread, slowly towns grew. Slowly the country stretched west, inch by inch, not by grand leaps, but by small, tired steps. Men walked, drove wagons, cut trees, dug ditches, built fences, and called it progress. It was just more work. The land was wide and silent, and the people filled it with slow noise, the kind that lingers, not echoes. The wars that followed came and went, each one leaving marks that faded slowly, like scars on old wood. The people moved on, built again, plowed again, waited again. There was talk of freedom, of destiny, of greatness, but it all sounded the same after a while. the same words said by new mouths over and over, while the rivers kept moving and the grass kept growing. The cities rose slowly from mud and smoke, brick by brick, floor by floor. People moved in and worked and slept and aged and were replaced. The lights grew brighter, the noise louder, but beneath it all the same rhythm went on, slow and steady. The country called itself young, but it was already old in its habits. It grew heavy with its own size. It spread and filled and forgot what it had been before. Men dug into mountains, cut through rivers, laid rails and wires across plains, but none of it changed the slowness. It only stretched it farther. Every invention promised speed, but brought more waiting. The trains, the cars, the machines all moved fast, but the lives stayed slow. The people woke, worked, ate, slept, dreamed the same dreams generation after generation. The country changed shape, but not pace. Even when it fought itself, it did so slowly, one side against another, brother against brother. The fields red, then green again. The smoke cleared, and people went back to the same work as before, only with new sorrow in their bones. The years passed, the maps changed, but the feeling of waiting stayed. Factories rose and fell. Farms grew and failed. Cities spread and decayed, and still people woke and worked and waited, sometimes for better days, sometimes for nothing in particular. The country learned to speak louder, but not clearer. It learned to build higher, but not steadier. It learned to move faster, but not farther. The rivers still flowed, the grass still grew. The wind moved the same way it had before. The story of the United States was never about heroes or battles or great discoveries. It was about the long wait of time, pressing on the same land under different names. It was about the slow turning of the earth under tired feet, and the sound of wheels and boots and voices blending into one endless hum that never stopped and never changed. The flag waved, the people cheered, the parades passed, and the dust settled again. The country grew tired of its own noise, and yet kept making more. It could not stop, it only changed the tune a little. The buildings grew taller, the machines louder, the lights brighter, but the faces stayed the same. Eyes squinting at horizons that never came closer, promises repeated until they lost meaning. The story stretched on, a slow unwinding of years, each one a copy of the last, dressed in new colors. The country moved into wars and peace and wars again, into dreams and fears and dreams again. Each age thought itself new, but it was always the same, waiting, working, hoping, forgetting. The old roads became highways, the wagons became cars, the fields became suburbs, but the silence between things stayed the same. The long spaces of waiting, the hours of labor, the breath between words that said nothing. The country was full of sound, but empty of rest, and the people moved through it like ghosts of their own making, slow, steady, tired. The sea touched the coasts, the rivers cut through the plains, the mountains watched it all unmoved. The seasons turned and turned again, and the country kept calling itself young as it aged. The people told stories of beginnings, but the beginnings had no end. They were still beginning, still trying to become something they already were. The weight of the years grew thick and soft, like dust over everything. The fields, the cities, the hearts of men. And still the story went on. The long, slow story of a land that wanted to be fast, but never could. The long, slow history of work without pause, of motion without rest, of dreams without sleep. The country became itself not in a day or a year, but in the endless drift of time, until no one could tell where it began or if it had begun at all. And still it kept moving, slowly, endlessly, like the river that never stops but never hurries. That was how the United States became a country, not in fire or thunder, but in the quiet, patient turning of days that all felt the same and still do.